こんにちは。今日のスピーキングを始めます。Origins of Jazz Jazz developed in the latter part of the 19th century from black rock songs, field horrors, hymns, and spirituals whose harmonic, rhythmic, and melodic elements were predominantly African. Because of its spontaneous emotion and improvisational character, and because it is basically a black origin and association, jazz has to some extent not been accorded the degree of recognition it deserves. European audiences have often been more receptive to jazz, and thus many American jazz musicians have become expatriates. At the outset, jazz was slow to win acceptance by the general public not only because of its cultural origin, but also because it tended to suggest loose morals and low social status. However, jazz gained a wide audience when white orchestras adopted or imitated it, and became legitimate entertainment in the late 1930s when Benny Goodman led racially mixed groups in concerts at Carnegie Hall. Show tunes became common vehicles for performance, and while the results were exquisite, rhythmic and harmonic development were impeded until the mid-1940s. Jazz is generally thought to have begun in New Orleans, spread into Chicago, Kansas City, New York City, and the West Coast. The blues, vocal, and instrumental was and is a vital component of jazz, which includes, roughly in order of appearance, ragtime, New Orleans, or Dixieland jazz, swing, bop, or bebop, progressive, or cool jazz, new bop, or hard bop, soul stream, mainstream modern, Latin jazz, jazz rock, and avant-garde or free jazz. Newspapers. The word journalism was originally applied to the reportage of current events in printed form, specifically newspapers, but with the advent of radio and television in the 20th century, the use of the term has broadened to include all printed and electronic communication dealing with current affairs. The earliest known journalistic product was a news sheet circulated in ancient Rome called the Acta Diana, published daily from 59 BC. It was hung in prominent places and recorded important social and political events. In China during the Tang Dynasty, a court circular called a Pao, or report, was issued to government officials. This gazette appeared in various forms and under various names more or less continually to the end of Qing Dynasty. In 1911, the first regularly published newspapers appeared in German cities, and in Antwerp around 1609, the first English newspaper, the Weekly News, was published in 1622. One of the first daily newspapers, the Daily Current, appeared in 1702. At first, hindered by government-imposed censorship, restrictions, and taxes, newspapers in the 18th century came to enjoy the reportorial freedom and indispensable function that they have retained to the present day. The growing demand for newspapers owing to the spread of literary and the introduction of steam and then electric-driven presses caused the daily circulation of newspapers to rise from the thousands to the hundreds of thousands and eventually to millions. Changing a constitution. Processes of amending or changing a constitution are normally provided for in the document itself. The United States Constitution has only been amended 26 times since it went into effect in 1789, and 10 of those amendments consist of the Bill of Rights that was added in 1791. Because the amendment process is time-consuming and cumbersome, and the fundamental law of the land is not easily subject to the whims of spiritual interest groups, factions, or even the majority of the population at any given time. The shorter and more basic a constitution is, the less likely it is to be changed. The most successful constitutions confine themselves primarily to the procedures of government. By contrast, those constitutions having lengthy sections of what amount to statute law are subject to frequent amendment. If a constitution embodies, for example, provisions that guarantee full employment, housing, or college education, it may fail if the government is unable to live up to these promises. It was just this type of situation that led to the one failed experiment in the United States Constitution. The 18th or Prohibition Amendment was added in 1919. It was a law prohibiting the manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages. The statute represented the desire of a substantial fraction of the American population at the time, but it proved unenforceable and failed miserably because too many people disliked it and refused to obey. It was repealed or withdrawn by the 21st Amendment in 1933. Correction. A major interest of the criminologist is correction. What should be done with the criminal once he has been caught, tried, and convicted? Until well into the 19th century, penalties consisted primarily of public humiliation, beatings or torture, banishment or exile, death, fines, or confiscation of property. Imprisonment as a penalty became common after the 16th century, but only for lesser offenses. Not until the late 19th century did imprisonment become the most common penalty for most crimes. This resulted in great part from the work of criminologists who persuaded the society against the uselessness of other punishments. Gradually, the purpose of imprisonment began to shift from confinement to attempt to turn prisoners away from the life of crime when they were released. Prisons for young offenders, the first of which was established at Elmira, New York, in 1876, were called reformatories. They gave greater emphasis to education for their inmates. Probably the most significant correctional developments of the late 19th century were probation and parole. Under probation, the sentence of a selected convicted criminal is suspended. If the criminal promises to behave well, accept some supervision of his life, and meet certain specific requirements, parole involves conditional release from confinement after part of a sentence has already been served. It is granted only if the prisoner seems to have changed into an honest and trustworthy person. Animal communication and human language. Apes, chimpanzees, and dolphins seem capable of communicating with one another. However, their communication systems are very simple. They cannot communicate about abstract concepts and ideas or talk about objects that are not in their immediate environment. Their communication apparatus is limited to simple gestures and very limited range of vocal utterances that vary primarily in pitch and volume. On the other hand, human speech is built up from a variety of units, which loosely speaking correspond to vowel and consonant sounds, while animal communication systems are genetically inherited. This is not true of human language. At birth, humans are programmed to learn language. The ability to learn is genetically inherited. However, language itself is learned from interaction with individuals in society. If a child were raised in an environment where language was never used, the kid would never learn the language. Fortunately, children are brought up in a language-rich environment, and they quickly acquire language skills. Social interaction is fundamental to human language. More precisely, our language is social dependent and conventional. This means that our language is defined and controlled by the community in which we live. Speakers within our language community accept a system of rules called grammar, which governs our language. 終わり。